If your husband struggles with sexual addiction and his progress seems to be going nowhere, do you ever think to yourself, I think it might be time for me to leave? Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're happy to be back with you today with our panel of expert wives, expert counselors here at Faithful and True. We've got Debbie Laser, Elizabeth Hardesty, Beth Miller, and from home on her phone, we have Susie Smith. And of course, we have the host of the show, Dr. Greg Miller.
Well, thank you.
How's everybody doing this morning?
Doing great.
Good.
Wow.
All right.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, we hope that everybody had the opportunity to hear last week's podcast in which we started this discussion about the wife's perspective of what to do when you've been betrayed. And so we're going to continue that conversation today. And Deb, how do you want to jumpstart today's talk?
Well, I think we want to talk a little bit about, sometimes it gets really clear that it is time for us to make a decision to do something other than to stay or to wait. And we're going to talk about what are some of the decisions that we might make to leave or take a time away from the marriage while we work on something else to move us along.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stands out to me when we think about this question, why would I get to the place of needing to choose to leave, again, whether permanently or even for a season, the main thing that comes to my mind is that there is this awareness that my partner is not invested in doing the work to be well, that for whatever reason, he is not owning his own recovery, right? That it, at least from my perception, given some of the behaviors that I'm seeing, it does not seem that he is internally motivated. There might be some movement when I recommend, have you called your therapist? Or when I suggest, hey, have you found a group? But other than that, the behavior that a woman is seeing is something that is concerning, that she's beginning to feel this internal awareness of this does not look like a person in active recovery.
Mm-hmm. Can I jump in here, Beth?
Yeah, please do.
I think about what you're saying, and I think what I'm hearing, a wife has had some time to watch a husband and has gathering the opinion that he is not embracing recovery. I think there's also the scenario of the wife who is, boom, right at the very beginning, just knows she needs a separation because of just the chaos. Maybe you could speak to that.
I can maybe jump in, and we want to make sure we reference previous podcasts we've done on this topic of redemptive separation. And we also have a document that kind of walks couples through that process. But I think that was exactly what was true for me in our story, Susie, is it was just chaotic. And I think I saw some changes in Chris, but I didn't even know what to be looking for or not looking for or what change should be, or I just knew I needed some space. And so I think just what I even talked about in the previous podcast of just having that space to slow down. And so just us leaving, him leaving for a while, us separating for a while was the best thing. It didn't mean divorce. We didn't have to make any decisions about that, but there needed to be time for him, time for me to even see what should I even be looking for? What does change even look like?
Yeah, Elizabeth, I would agree. I was in the very same or a very similar situation. And for whatever reason, I'm so thankful that at the very beginning of our story unfolding, I knew I needed separation. I needed it for me. And I needed to be able to watch to see, was Greg going to do the work to be well? And so that's one of the things that can be really helpful. Again, it doesn't mean it's going to turn into a permanent leaving. That may be the best of hard choices, and it can be an important place to begin.
I think at Faithful and True, this is maybe a little different concept about separation, which is why we like to put that word in front of it, redemptive or therapeutic, sometimes we use, because so many people carry a belief system that if you separate, it's just the next right step to finally being able to walk out the door. It just makes it a little gentler, smoother, easier, or something. And so there are an awful lot of folks, and I think especially we hear in churches and ministry that highly disapprove of this idea of separating. And yet we have found it to be extremely helpful for reasons you guys are already talking about. Space to calm things down, to not be making rash decisions when everyone's in the heat of the moment, to be able to really work on yourself and make sure that you've done everything you want to do to try to be available to the marriage and to be patient and even forgiving, and yet also respect yourself, so that if you do choose to leave, you know that you've done everything you can do. And that doesn't necessarily mean, like you say, just because you're committed to those kinds of things, that your spouse is willing to take a look at what their behaviors are.
Well, one thing that I would add that can be a concern is a lot of people will say, well, how can we work on our marriage if we're separated? I know I get a lot of anxiety from men sometimes that they want to be near their wife so that she can see what a great job they're doing. And so just to help them understand that if it is an intentional redemptive separation, even though you are apart, this is you working on your marriage.
And the term redemptive to me sounds hopeful. It doesn't seem like finality. It doesn't seem like you're giving up on the marriage. Redemptive separation to me says, in the name of hope and healing, we're going to try this separation.
Right.
And in some ways, we actually are taking a break from marriage counseling. I guess I would say that, Greg. I mean, we're not trying to work on growing a marriage. We're taking it and putting it on the back burner, while we really, each of us, go off and highly focus on ourselves as an individual and find out things about ourselves. What drives me to want to be in this marriage? Is it because I'm just afraid to be alone, or I have all these kids now that I have to somehow manage and parent by myself, and I don't think I can do that, or I don't think I could take care of myself financially, so I think I'll hang around this marriage because there's so many benefits in terms of how I can live my lifestyle. We learn a lot of things about when we go off and spend time by ourselves. We learn an awful lot of things about who we are, including how safe we are in this relationship. And I think one of the things that drives us apart is that there is a lack of safety, or as we call it, toxicity. And everybody can work on that. None of us are squeaky clean safe, I always say. And so we can start figuring out those things. And hopefully when we come back to really focus on all three of these parts, then marriage, each of us as an individual, we're bringing it back better parts of who we are as an individual. We know ourselves better. We can talk about ourselves, what we're needing, what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and share those more vulnerable parts of who we are.
I'm curious. I know we've all listened to hundreds of stories over the years where a woman is expressing her concern about what might lead her to make that choice to leave for, say, a redemptive separation or possibly longer. What are some of the things that stand out to you about some red flags of what would lead a woman to make that wise choice to leave?
Maybe we could reach out to Susie here on the phone first, since it's a little hard for her to know what we're doing down here.
I have a thought about that. A lot of the times when I've worked with women and who are making that choice, they are in a place of repeated rounds of acting out, repeated times where they've discovered acting out. They've thought the husband got help. Maybe he did, but it didn't last long term. And so they've reached kind of a new place of saying, okay, I can't keep in this cycle, and so I need to do something different.
Adding to that too, I think about the questions that Greg poses to the men at the workshop, of do you want to get well? what are you thirsty for? What are you willing to die for? And I think that was one thing for me, is that I needed to know deep down and see that Chris was answering those questions at a heart level, that it was intrinsically motivated, and that he wasn't doing it for me. He wasn't doing it for our marriage even, but for himself, that he wanted that freedom. And so I think that was even one thing for me, of even just having that space and time to see, okay, like, is there consistency over time in his decisions?
I think one of the concerns you raised, I think, Greg, was if, or others might too, if we're separated, how is it we watch a spouse and even know what changes they're making? And I would say that actually these kind of changes show up in all ways at all times. Even because part of our redemptive separation is creating boundaries about what we will and will not do. We take out a lot of things that we would normally do, a lot of emotional talking usually. We certainly take out sex. We take out sharing a lot of time together. We divide up parenting time if there are children in a situation, so each has their own time off, so to speak, to work on themselves. We can even watch by how people adhere to the boundaries that have been created for this separation. It could be one of them is texting 15, 20 times a day, when the boundaries were that we're not going to communicate this way. So there are lots of ways to watch, how someone's heart has changed as we follow through on some of these basic things. And generally speaking, we're not taking out all seeing each other or communicating. There may be sharing of children. There may be a family day that you decide to keep in your separation. There may be sometimes we agree to talk about logistics, so we have those conversations. And in all those things, we're watching someone's heart, and we're watching how they're adhering to the things we've decided that we would do.
Yeah. Are there other behaviors that stand out when you are in a season, say, of watching, seeking to be discerning, that would be behaviors that a person would be concerned about?
Susie, any thoughts from you first?
I'm just thinking of new information or recurring patterns. I guess that's similar to what I said before, where it just doesn't feel like sobriety is happening. Lots of slips, maybe, where in our gut, right? We're working on, as wives, we're working on trusting intuition, listening to red flags. And those continue to come up for this woman, and so she perhaps chooses redemptive separation.
Adding to that, I think, one thing that I know was important for me, yes, was sobriety, right? And so seeing that Chris was pursuing sobriety, which includes lying, so being a man of honesty, no more lying, no more secrets, no more hiding. But I think along with that, one thing I've heard Chris say to the men that he works with and the couples we work with is sober-heartedness. And I think that's one thing that I think it's hard to even put words to, but I think it shows up, as you said, Debbie, like you'll know, because you just begin to see changes in terms of emotional regulation, anger, just different ways of being, that the transformation. And so I think if some of those things are lacking, or if you're seeing maybe this white-knuckled sobriety, or still keeping things hidden or not offering information, I think those are some things that cause concern.
Yeah. One of the things you just talked about, Elizabeth, is this idea of lying. And I think most people who have been in a situation of being betrayed would say that that is one of the most hurtful parts of what's happened. And so if there is ongoing lying, just regular inability to tell the truth, to be transparent, to be offering information, that can be really challenging. And I want to say, this is one of these times that it is challenging. We have to bring wisdom to this. It's not as if there is this black and white list that we're looking to check off, because chances are there can be times when a person really is engaged in active recovery and they won't be fully truthful about, what time they're coming home or what they had for lunch. And that doesn't mean that the whole thing is then, gone off the rails, right? And it's understandable that that's a trigger for the spouse. I'm not saying that, that wouldn't be triggering. And I think what we're talking about here are ongoing patterns where there's lots and lots of inability to show up honest, even and to talk about things that are challenging. And I think that's one of the ways that we know it's starting to shift.
One thing I would add, I've worked with men before, and kind of the way I would describe it is the energy of their recovery is out of obligation. That they don't see the big deal of what they've done. They know it's not bad, they know it's not great, but they really are doing this for everyone else. And they may even be doing a good job of doing it for everybody else. But that energy is coming out of obligation. And my guess is for a spouse, if she's picking up that energy, that it gets very confusing because it appears as if he's doing the right things, and yet maybe she's struggling to trust that motivation piece. So then she begins to trust the sustainability of it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with what you're saying, Greg, is that one of the things we learn as I think we're in a recovery program for a while is motivation. Not only our own motivation and why we're choosing to do what we're doing and wanting our motivation to come from within us, not about trying to change another person. But also we are very fine-tuned to pick up when someone's caring about us or desire to be with us is coming from their motivation of really wanting to do that or just trying to keep us happy and quiet or not angry or whatever it is. So that motivation piece is a part also of someone becoming a new person, being congruent enough to show up and to do that and to share fears about another person's anger or to share concerns if they're over controlling or whatever it is, to be able to talk about all of those things. So I agree. I think when we can start to believe that someone has really internally taken in the desire to be a different person, it will show up in ways far beyond just the sexual addiction changes that are being made. It will show up all across the board in terms of wanting to be a truth teller in all things in life. And it'll show up in terms of patience and how you deal with your anger and your anxiety and just wanting all of those things to really be looked at and changed because they're all affecting the whole person that you are.
And let's just say it's progress, not perfection, right? Yes. So it is very much a process. I wouldn't say that I saw one day later, radical transformation, but it was that inner drive, right? Of Chris just saying, I'm going after this, and nothing was going to stop it. And there were some falls along the way for him, but I saw his heart, and I really trusted the intent of his heart, as I've heard you say before, Debbie, and really like that.
I think one of the Susie, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking about the wife being blamed for the addiction, and that being a pattern that really needs to change for a wife to start to feel like he's embracing recovery. And so if she is continuing to feel blamed, I guess as an answer to your question, Beth, of what things might lead us to redemptive separation, this idea that he needs to take ownership.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point. And if there is not the ownership of this is mine, you have done nothing to cause this, then absolutely that's a red flag. I think another thing that we talk about sometimes in one-on-one counseling or at our workshops is when there is a lack of desire to work on healthy sexuality. And one of the things that shows up sometimes is this idea of addicted sex and marriage, where a person is pressuring, a husband is pressuring his wife to be sexual more frequently than she is feeling comfortable with. And she has this intuition, she has a knowing in her that something about that feels off. And while we can unpack a lot about that, I'd love for you all to speak to how do you see red flags show up around this issue?
Well, the simplest way I would respond to that is to look at how either of us respond when we want to be sexual and our partner is not willing. And I think healthy sexuality will bring to it a patience and perhaps another choice at that time. If what we want is closeness with our spouse or emotional, spiritual closeness, and then also physical closeness, that we may be willing to do other things if for whatever reason we're not ready and in a space to be sexual. But how we respond to that, I think, is telling. Do we pout and not talk to somebody for days because we feel rejected and we've taken on a lot of beliefs about ourselves if someone won't participate? Do we get angry and rageful and, make life miserable for the other person for a time? In my opinion, those are all indications that there's still a real connection to sexuality being my most important need and being the way that you show me love. And so I want to make it clear, though, too, because this is a really hypercharged topic.
It is.
That we don't want one person in a marriage to have the power always to be the person that says no. And so if there's a lack of balance that way, but also if these other things are going on and the responses seem unhealthy, there is a real need to talk about whether, in fact, sobriety, on his part or hers, if she's a female addict, has led to this idea of anytime I need sex or want sex, I can get it in my marriage, and therefore I'm doing great. That's not the healthy alternative that we're looking for couples. And it may be that they need some extra help with sexuality issues, and we're always mindful of that, referring to specialists if that's the case. And there are a lot of things that are brought into a marriage, frankly, that can contribute to those issues, sexual abuse on either or both of their parts when they were younger. So we need to look at those things because they're all impacting how healthy our sexuality is going to be.
I think I go back, Elizabeth, to that question that you talked about right at the beginning of, do I want to be well? And I think while it's not a linear process, by and large, we have good intuition of knowing whether or not our spouse is saying yes to that question. So maybe it shows up in they're making good choices around healthy sexuality, Deb, like you were saying. Maybe it shows up in a willingness to go after high anxiety or a lot of anger. They're doing whatever it takes, right, to be well. When those things are not happening over and over again, then it can be wise and helpful for the spouse to know, I have some choices. I'm not stuck. I can take good care of myself here, and to consider what is my next right step.
I'd like to end. I know all the eyes are looking at clocks, so I know we have to end. But I'd like to just say that it has been my experience in working with so many women over the years that if we will allow ourselves to be in touch with what we are feeling and allow that spirit to drive our next right step, what I have consistently seen is it's not an intellectual decision we make. It's one that at some point a woman just says, I can't live like this another day. And what I've seen is even though her greatest desire maybe was to stay, or she had the greatest hope that all of this work could lead to redemptive marriage, that there is still this part of her, if she's really listening for it, that knows she just can't do that. And so I always tell a woman, watch for that. You don't need to listen to what other people are telling you. You don't need to try to say, well, it's been long enough, so I need to make a decision. It will show up when it's time. And I think that's the best place to make this decision.
Yeah, it is a sacred, holy movement. Yeah.
So one thing I would say is, what would you say to a woman who in her soul believes that it is the next right step for her to exit the relationship? what type of blessing would you want to provide for her?
Well, first of all, I always let women know that I will support whatever decision they make. And that as far as I'm concerned, there's absolutely no judgment. Her listening to that place is what's most important in terms of her feeling good and right about her future. And I'll recommend that she get some support with information too. If she's beginning to think she needs to leave, to get some legal advice about that, to know what her life might look like. So it's a combination of just really meeting her where she is, and also reminding her that I'll continue to support her whether she's in or out of a marriage. And I think we all do that. We actually have women here who are at all stages of decisions about things. So we're not committed to just working and trying to make a marriage work. We love marriage, and we very much want marriage. Most importantly, though, we want individuals to be well. And when they're well, they bring to a marriage something much greater and an opportunity to really transform what they have.
Yeah.
I would just close by saying a blessing that you could offer her is something that sounds like you're enough. You are loved. And your choice to that you've agonized over to leave the marriage does not lessen your worth or value in any way.
We're glad that all four of you stayed. And with that, we'd like to close today's podcast. We'd like to thank you for joining us. We are so excited that we're able to bring the Faithful and True podcast to you in both an audio and a video format. Please go to faithfulandtrue.com and click on the podcast, where you will have the opportunity to click on our YouTube channel and like us and subscribe. We'd love to have you as a subscriber. We've got some great numbers to report to you in all humility. We have recently bypassed over 700,000 plays of our podcast, which we're very proud of. And now that we have started the Faithful and True channel, we're excited to see the subscribership growing there as well. So until we join you again next week, we hope that these podcasts are beneficial to you, that they're giving you good direction and much comfort. We hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.